L'ordine del giorno reca le dichiarazioni del Consiglio.
Now, the next item on today's agenda are the Council and Commission statements on preparation of the European Council of the 22nd and 23rd of June. I'll give the floor straight to Minister Dalli on behalf of the Council.
Buongiorno. Grazie Presidente, President Juncker, Commissioner, honourable members. The 28 heads of state of government will be meeting in Brussels next week. They have a very dense agenda which will be spread over 2 days. The first item on the agenda is migration. The Eastern Mediterranean route and the Western Balkans route are largely under control. The most pressing issue today is the Central Mediterranean route. In February, leaders agreed on a list of measures to address the situation. Member States and institutions have followed up on this guidance and significantly increased their engagement. Still, the magnitude of the crisis and the harrowing numbers of lives lost at sea remind us every day that more is needed. More efforts and more coordination to implement what has been decided. The European Council will review the state of play and look at how to improve the effectiveness of our action. Leaders will also revert to the reform of the common European asylum system. The European Council is expected to give a steer for further work to continue under the Estonian presidency. Second on the agenda is security and defence. In the light of recent tragic attacks, notably in Manchester and London, leaders will again speak out firmly against terrorism, hatred and violent extremism, and will look at what more the EU can do. As concerns external security and defence, leaders established a comprehensive work programme in December. Since then, more progress has been achieved than the last 10 years. Building on this new momentum, leaders will discuss further steps on some issues. For instance, permanent structured cooperation, EU battle groups, or the industrial dimension of EU defence. Turning now to jobs, growth and competitiveness, which is the third item on the agenda. A year ago, leaders set the deadline of 2018 to complete the single market in all its dimensions. They will therefore look at what has been achieved and where we are lagging behind. This deadline should remain a strong driver to make headway at all levels, including in interinstitutional negotiations. Furthermore, in the light of recent developments, the European Council will return to trade policy. Leaders are expected to reaffirm the EU's strong commitment to our trade policy. They will also discuss how the EU can make sure trade remains free and fair for all. And to conclude, I would like to mention two other important topics. First, leaders will show their strong and continued support to the Paris Agreement on climate change. This is an important point, and we will discuss this here later on in the morning, and I think that we should expect some strong language on this issue. Second, in preparation for the Estonian presidency, leaders will encourage a broader outlook on the digital dimension of Europe. As demonstrated by recent cyber attacks, digital issues go beyond the digital single market. They have a bearing on many, if not all, other EU policies. So for now, I thank you for your attention.
Grazie.
Thank you very much, Minister Dalli. I'll give the floor now to the President of the European Commission, Mr. Jean-Claude Juncker.
Good morning, Mr. President, Minister, honourable members of Parliament. Since we last met here 1 month ago, Europe has again seen its way of life attacked through cowardly acts of terrorism. In Europe, determination will always triumph over fear. These attacks will not undermine our resilience. They do, however, bring into sharper focus the discussions on defence and security that we will have at this month's European Council. Europeans expect their Union to keep them safe from threats, whether they be from within or without, and whatever their nature. That was recognised by EU leaders in Bratislava and in Rome when they pledged to step up their defence cooperation. They highlighted defence as one of the key issues for our Union when moving forward. To support that, and faithful to what I had told this Parliament last September at the State of the European Union speech, the Commission last week published a reflection paper on the future of European defence, showing how far we can go depending on the level of ambition and political will of our Member States. We have all the tools we need in the treaties to make it happen, including permanent structured cooperation, the sleeping beauty of the Lisbon Treaty. But now is the time to decide, and this House must play a full role in that debate. Whichever road we go down, our ever closer partnership with NATO will remain the cornerstone of Europe's defence and security. On defence, the European Union and NATO are like twins. We are part of the same family, and rivalry is not an option. Within NATO, there is a great deal the European Union can do to improve its own cooperation. The simple truth is that no European country alone can tackle the scale and complexity of the challenges we face, and neither can we rely on any foreign power to do it for us. We cannot outsource our own security. That starts with the need to invest in a more efficient way. The United States already spends twice as much as all European countries combined, while Russia and China have dramatically stepped up their defence budgets in recent years. And 90% of the money we do invest on defence research and technology in Europe is spent without any kind of coordination at all. That leads to inefficiencies and duplication that could easily be avoided. That is why the European Defence Fund that the Commission proposed last week will support Member States' budget and facilitate cooperation on joint research and purchasing of equipment and technology. We have earmarked €590 million to support defence by 2020 and have proposed to allocate at least €1.5 billion each year after that. The fund is both an investment boost to our industry and a statement of intent to our citizens that expect us to do more to protect them. I was encouraged to see already vocal support for our proposals at last week's high-level conference on security and defence, which I hosted with Prime Minister Sobotka in Prague, but also the Franco-German announcement for the development of a European drone programme and the joint training of officers. We are not talking about the militarisation of the European continent. It is about doing more together for the stability and peace of our continent. Monsieur le Président, Mesdames.
President, ladies and gentlemen, it's only normal that the European Union should be strongly involved in all issues involving security and defence. World security requires much more than simply military defence efforts. European stability and world stability also depends on our efforts for development cooperation and their efforts to fight against climate change. Because these are sources of instability around the world, and people around the world will suffer the effects. The rising sea levels have never moved so fast. The coast of Florida and some European coasts are strongly affected. But not all peoples are going to face the consequences of climate change equally. The poorest parts of the world, which represent only 5% of CO2 emissions, are the most vulnerable parts. But having said that, we cannot pretend that we did not know. The number of natural catastrophes linked to climate change has more than tripled since the 1960s. Every year, these catastrophes have caused more than 60,000 deaths, primarily but not exclusively in developing countries. Droughts are becoming more and more frequent and more serious, causing genuine famine situations, as is currently the situation in East Africa. Reducing budgets for development aid or questioning our commitments under this COP21 would be to shoulder a serious responsibility and endanger world stability. That's the message that the European Union has always carried and will continue to do. You can count upon me, and the world will count upon us. Over the last few years, we've seen the biggest influx of refugees since the Second World War. Today we have to prevent an even more serious catastrophe without wasting a moment. By 2050, if we fail to implement the Paris Accords, there will be hundreds of thousands of climate refugees on the way to Europe, in Germany. The European Union has to be at the vanguard of reforming the European asylum system. Public opinion often feels that the European Union is not making progress on the refugee crisis, but that isn't the reality. The proof of that is our current migration package, which the European Commission sent to the Council yesterday. You'll see more solidarity than before. But we still don't see enough solidarity out there. We want to ensure that our external borders are better protected than ever before. The Union and the Member States support Greece and Italy. 20,000 refugees from these two countries have been relocated, and that proves that where there's a will, there's a way. On the ground, we've set up new reception centres where EU staff and experts from Member States are working together. At the same time, we have worked to secure our external border and to put it under joint responsibility. A joint border service and coast guard is going to make it better possible to secure the external border. But nobody is talking about it. 1,600 European border guards supporting national border guards. 977 in Greece, 400 in Italy, but also more in Spain and Bulgaria. 1,500 border guards immediately ready for deployment. So we're not active only in Europe, but we're also active in working with those countries that are receiving the most refugees, like Turkey. At my most recent meeting with Mr. Erdogan at the end of May, we reaffirmed our commitment to continue the successful implementation of the EU-Turkey agreement. The EU keeps its word, and Turkey is keeping its word, because we're now getting 90% less refugees from Turkey going into Greece compared to the rate before the agreement. But we simply cannot rest on our laurels. We can certainly see clear shortcomings, and we can see areas where Member States need to make more of an effort. These are practical issues, such as providing the necessary resources for the border and coast guards. But we also need to ensure that Member States implement EU law. We have constantly been saying that some countries need to do more to do their share in distributing the refugees. But 3 countries, Poland, Hungary and the Czech Republic, have not accepted a single refugee from Italy or Greece. And for more than a year now, they have not actually been taking any refugees at all. That gives us no other choice other than to initiate infringement proceedings against these countries today. What I wanted to say is that this is not a question of sanctions. It's to make it clear that agreements that have been made are binding law, even if you voted against. That's the way the treaties work, and we have to fulfill our obligations. We have 137 infringement proceedings underway against 27 member states at the present, and we will pursue those in the same manner. But it's a question here of observing European law. It's not a question of sanctions. European solidarity cannot be a one-way street. Traffic has to go in both directions. I have not abandoned hope that the European spirit, European reason, and our European values will prevail in the end. And in this issue of solidarity, we should not have to be solving our problems before the Court of Justice. Solidarity is not something to go before the courts. Solidarity is something that requires immediate political responsibility. Solidarity cannot be forced with a crowbar. Rather, it needs to come from the heart. So at the next European Council, the member states are going to have to work intensively on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Today is a very busy day because we will have two special guests this morning. For this, we need to respect the timing during your speeches. Normally, I am very flexible, but today it's impossible to do it for me. The first speaker is Manfred Weber.
Now it works. I try to respect the rules from our President. Thanks so much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, dear colleagues. I want to start with a topic which is not officially on the agenda next week, but it will for sure overshadow the whole debate. It's about the general elections in the UK. And let me start with a frank analysis from our side. I think it's not a good result, because we were asking from London clear orientation, stability, and what we see today is a situation of disorientation. Some call it a chaotic situation, which we experience in London. Theresa May gambled and she lost, and the country is deeply divided. 12 months after we had the Brexit result, we see the political landscape all over Europe, that we have clear leadership in France now, Spain is stable, Italy is stable, Germany is stable, Dublin. So Europe is united, and we see in London a lot of problems on the table. So the main message for the people in the European Union is that it's better to reform the European Union if it is needed than to destroy it or to leave it. Dear friends, one inspiring element of these elections is that the youth is back. In the Brexit decisions they abstained. Now they went voting. They took their destiny in their own hands, and that is a very promising thing, because they are in favour of partnership, they are in favour of Europe. The hard Brexit was the offer from Theresa May, and I have to say there is no majority for this option. The people are rethinking again the priorities in Great Britain, and they are today discussing mainly about jobs. And that is what we also should focus. Let's talk about jobs, let's talk about economy, about the daily life of the people. That is one thing. And the second thing is for sure the official agenda. And there, the most important thing is we have enough papers on the table, we have enough talks on the issues. It's now time to act. That is what people all over Europe expect from our leaders. In defence, it's obvious. We have the very good paper of the Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker's papers on the table. We have Bratislava decision on the table. So let's start now with cyber war, with drones, with actions in the Sahel zone. It's up to us now simply to do it, and that is what we expect from the Council. And on migration, for us as EPP, the precondition for all further measures was always that we need strong border control. We have to protect our borders. That is now, when we listen to our Commission President, that is now much more better organised, and this works much more better than in the last years. Now we can go a step further. And I want to underline that in this question of solidarity, not Europe fails, because Brussels, let me say, the Commission is offering a clear proposal. We in the European Parliament have a clear majority in favour of practising solidarity in the European Union. It's not Europe who fails, it's the national egoism for the moment who fails and who is not bringing up results. That's why let's move, let's go on, let's show leadership. Having Brexit in mind, the most convincing thing what our leaders can do is now to act. Thanks so much.
Prima di dare la parola al Presidente
Well, before I give the floor to Mr. Pittella, I just wanted to tell you that today I won't be allowing any blue cards. As I said earlier, time is short and we've got two very important guests taking part in our work today. I also wanted to send a message of solidarity on behalf of the European Parliament to the City of London. We've heard about the terrible fire that's affecting a skyscraper in London, so I was very sad to hear about the City of London being so sadly affected by dramatic events. President Pittella.
Thank you, President. I would like to make one comment to Ms. May. If you stake everything on a landslide, you're always on the verge of losing everything. And I would like to congratulate the British Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, because what we've seen is a victory for his manifesto and also a concept of a fair Brexit. Not hard Brexit, not soft Brexit, but the right Brexit, a fair Brexit. On terrorism, if we want to tackle it seriously, the first thing we need to do is strengthen cooperation between intelligence services. Anything else is propaganda. Refugees and migration. Yes, have surveillance at external borders and controls. Some member states have been blocking the refugee relocation scheme for some time. We want to remove those obstacles. I'm very grateful to the Maltese presidency, but turning to the Council, unfortunately, the European Commission's proposal on revising Dublin has not been taken forward by Council, and discussions have not even been opened, which is a shameful situation. Parliament has been working very hard on that. In contrast, the problem is not only the issue of refugees, and this is something that I know you're aware of. There's also the influx of illegal immigrants, and I think we need to bear in mind a few points. If our aim is to reduce illegal immigration, then we need to work on legal migration. We need to open up legal channels for migration. That is the key. And that needs to go hand in hand with a serious partnership with Africa. Not the idea of, yes, we'll hand out a little bit of money to Africa so that they will accept us sending people back. Not that sort of deal, but actually a proper partnership, proper cooperation that will allow us to face together the major challenges that the continent of Africa is facing. President Juncker has referred to climate crisis. We also have democracy and development where there are issues where there are many multinationals with their eye on Africa, their eye on what they can get out of Africa without giving anything back to the citizens of Africa. And until we have democracy and until we can help them build a proper democratic system so that they can develop for themselves, Africans themselves can have ownership of their own development, then we will not be able to tackle these problems. They'll either want to come here or they'll join Boko Haram or someone else. We need to talk to those young people and offer them something. If we offer Africa that, we're actually offering a better future to Europe as well.
Grazie, onorevole Pittella.
Thank you. Mr. Pittella. Mr. Kamall.
Thank you. The agenda for this summit highlights some of the big challenges ahead: security, migration and asylum, Turkey, as well as others have said, some discussions on the Brexit negotiations. Topics we have discussed before are no doubt topics that we will discuss again, but each time we have to ask ourselves, are we any closer to solutions and real action? But if you'll allow me, let me start with the British general election. An election in which the Conservative Party lost seats, but not enough to lose power, and where the opposition gained seats, but not enough to gain power, ended up 56 seats behind. And just as in any other country, for example the Netherlands at the moment, the largest party will seek to form a government with support from a smaller party. But the UK government expects to begin negotiations later this month, for we have kept you waiting long enough. Just as in this Parliament, the largest party will need to build wider coalitions in order to pass legislation. If that means addressing concerns over civil liberties while drafting new laws to tackle the threat of terrorism, to my mind, a wider coalition is not necessarily a bad thing. Can I also take this opportunity to thank colleagues from across the political spectrum for their messages of condolences and solidarity after recent terrorist attacks in both Manchester and my home city of London. We may be divided on our politics, but we are united in not wanting to allow the terrorists to win. And I hope the Council will understand the importance of tackling terrorism at different levels. At the international level, military cooperation without undermining NATO, better data sharing between national law enforcement agencies. At the national level, upholding the rule of law, our shared values and security of our citizens, as well as making sure that any shared intelligence is actually acted upon. And at a local community level, encouraging local projects to tackle radicalisation at its roots. But security is just one of the issues facing us. The migration crisis continues, as does the EU-Turkey deal. And the ECR believes that the EU should focus on a new relationship, based not on the false promise of membership, but on an honest relationship based on cooperation. Because while the deal with Turkey appears to be holding for now, the Council must seek consensus from all Member States to effectively tackle the migrant crisis in case that agreement breaks down. By getting the basics right, processing asylum applications quickly and efficiently, returning those who do not qualify to their country of origin, agreeing clear criteria for qualification based on the Geneva Convention, and by not continuing to pursue a struggling relocation scheme without the full support of all Member States. Our discussions on the challenges will continue way beyond this summit and future ones. But how many times do we have to discuss them before our voters see real progress? While others will call for new rules, the ECR group calls for the EU to make what we already have work better. While others will call for more agencies, the ECR group calls for more action. And while others will call for further political integration, the ECR group calls for political cooperation, for a reformed EU, which does less, but does it better.
Thank you, Mr. Kamall. Mr. Verhofstadt.
Thank you, President. I have to contradict Manfred Weber for once. He said that there is at least one positive outcome of the British election, Manfred, the disappearance of UKIP. And of those who want not only Britain out of Europe, who want to destroy the European Union from inside. But it's true, I think next week in the European Council there will be a lot of items on the agenda, but the main point of the agenda is, can we now start the negotiations on the Brexit? We are 3 years after the start of the debate. We are 1 year after the outcome of the British referendum. We are, I think, 3 months, yeah? 3 months after the triggering of the notification. And we are still not in a possibility, in a position to start negotiations, because there is, for the moment, in any way, not a clear position from the new government in the United Kingdom. If there is already a new government, because every day I read that there is a deal, but then 6 hours later, there is no deal. And they are still discussing it. But there are 5 pressing questions that need to be answered on a short-term basis, Mr. Kamall. Maybe you can help the government to respond to them. First is,
Is the British position still the letter of the 29th of March? Or will the new government take more into account the outcome of the elections, which was a little bit different than the hard talk of the letter of the 29th? And the second question is, will it be the opinion of the Tories, or will it be the position of the whole nation? Party interest or national interest? Because this is not about the Tories leaving the European Union. This question is about the UK leaving the European Union. And the third question, what with the Good Friday Agreement? What is the proposal? That a Good Friday Agreement can be still in place, that no hard border will be created between the Republic on the one hand and Northern Ireland on the other hand. And then the fourth question, will the British government, as we do from the European side, 100% guarantee the current rights of EU citizens living in Britain, like we already am prepared to guarantee the rights, the current rights of the British citizens living on the continent? And finally, is it still, fifth question, is it still the opinion of the UK government to go out of the single market, to go out of the customs union? Is really that populistic illusion to limit free movement in Europe more important than in fact the prosperity and the fortune of the British workers, the British industry, the British companies and the British economy? Because let's face the reality, already this Brexit has a negative impact on everybody in Europe and especially on Britain. The growth, there is zero growth in the first quarter for the moment in Britain. It's 3 times less than in the last quarter of last year. And that because of what? Because of the uncertainty that has been created. So I think the time is now ripe that we receive from the British side clear answers on these 5 questions so that these negotiations can start. And I know yesterday Emmanuel Macron, the new French president, spoke about an open door. He said, if Britain is changing his mind, it will find an open door. I can say I agree, I don't disagree with him, but like in Alice in Wonderland, no, all doors are the same. It will be a brand new door. A brand new door with a new Europe, a Europe without rebates, without complexity, with real power and with unity. That is the door towards Europe. And for me, Jean-Claude, that is the most important now, the reform of our union. That this reform is not bogged down in these Brexit talks. Brexit talks will look more for the moment, if I can tell you that, as the procession of Echternach. You are from Luxembourg, you can explain that maybe to everybody, what the procession of Echternach is. That is 2 steps forward and 1 step backward. That's typical Echternach. So I'm very grateful to the Commission for the different reflection papers that they have put on the table. But the Commission is more than a think tank. I think the moment is now there, when we start these Brexit talks, to have also legislative proposals on the reform of the European Union, on defence, as you have done, on the economic and monetary union, but not only reflection papers, also legislative proposals. Don't give the space open to the Council. It's not the Council to fill in the space. It's the Commission who have to do it with legislative proposals. We have now a new president in France who is pro-European. We will have German election. That's the moment to go forward. We always say don't waste a good crisis. Well, don't waste also not a good election cycle too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Verhofstadt. Ms. Zimmer.
Herr Präsident, meine Damen und Herren, es sind...
Thanks very much, Mr. President. As I see it, there are 3 topics which are very relevant and which will undoubtedly be important in the Council meeting, formally or informally. There's a migration crisis, I'll come to that in a minute, Brexit, but also the situation in Greece. And can I call on you that the Council take position on the upcoming meeting of the creditors and Eurozone ministers and make clear that that's enough blackmailing. that that's enough with repayments from Greece, that there's got to be beginnings of negotiations for a debt write-off. You want to talk about jobs and growth, but at the same time you're allowing a part of Europe to completely collapse. The conditions are simply not in place there to allow growth and jobs to arise. Now on Brexit, just one remark. A lot's been said on this point already. Theresa May is trying to get the support of the DUP, and can I draw attention to the fact that just with just this fact alone, it already actually endangers the Good Friday Agreement. The British government is supposed to be a neutral party. It's bound to be a neutral party and non-party political. So I really have to draw attention to this fact. And as for the question of migration crises, let me remind you of one thing. Please ensure that legal and safe ways into Europe can be opened up. Deaths in the Mediterranean do not allow us to hesitate on this. They also mean that deals with Sudan or Libya don't make sense. They're both dubious regimes. They're failed states. We're supporting powers in Sudan that attacks migrants from other countries and areas in Africa. And they are also responsible for torture and inhuman treatment for thefts. We know that the Libyan Coast Guard is preventing rescue at sea. We know the report that was sent by Doctors Without Frontiers to the Federal Chancellor to do something about this. The 140 million, which is supposed to go to Sudan for funding so that they do something about migratory flows. This money should actually be assigned to countries where the refugees come from. We need to really help countries in Africa long term. Otherwise, calling for closed borders is simply inhuman, because it just means sending people help. And Mr. Juncker, and this is my last plea to you, you talked that the Union helps Italy and Greece. Please go to the hotspots. Yes, there is some help, but at the same time, there are obstacles put in the way of family reunification and attempts to send refugees back to Italy and Greece. That won't do. Solidarity is something that you support, and you're quite right to initiate breach proceedings against those countries. And it's not just a question of cutting off funds to these countries, but it's a question of the EU delivering on its obligations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Zimmer. Ms. Keller.
Dear colleagues, I share the calls of some of you for more solidarity and the refugee issue. I think it's super disappointing that the Council has even dropped any progress on the issue of solidarity from the agenda. And I'm afraid that if you can't solve that task, then I really have a hard time imagining how there can be progress in other areas, at least not in a way that would be satisfactory. And I think the reason for that is because for solving problems, you would actually need to tackle their root causes. You would have to look at the root cause for why people have to flee and do something about that. You would have to look at the root causes for conflicts, not just spend more money, and also on the root causes of radicalization and terror. Your answer to conflicts and violence worldwide is just a push for more military spending. You want to actually take money away, well, I should look there, you want to actually take money away from SME funding and from structural funds and put it into the weapons industry. But I don't really think that that particular industry really needs that extra bit of help. But because what we're actually doing here, or what we would be doing here, is actually make a 29th or in the future 28th sort of defense policy. But rather than doing that and wasting a lot of money, we should make pooling and sharing the rule and not the exception. And this sort of cooperation could actually save us like €100 billion every year, money that is actually urgently needed to tackle all the root causes of conflicts, for example, in the world. And also on terrorism, we urgently need answers. But I don't think that your recipe of simply collecting more and more data is going to do it. We need, rather, more police women and men on the ground. We need to strengthen the exchange of data on actual suspects and on known risk persons, so that the tools that we already have today actually serve the security of our citizens. And yes, of course, we need to prosecute those who pose a real threat to us and our way of life, absolutely. But we also need to look further into the root causes of radicalization, so that less people become a threat to our security and to our freedom. So I wish the Presidency good luck with their discussions and hope that you will defy my low expectations and actually dare to look into the root causes and come up with solutions that actually solve something. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Keller. Mr. Farage.
Well, I know a lot of you are very pleased with the result of the UK general election, and you view it as a victory for the EU. Let me give you a sense of perspective. In the 2015 general election, just 13% of voters voted for parties, namely UKIP, which was the only one that wanted to leave the European Union. Last Thursday, over 85% of British voters voted for parties on a manifesto not just of leaving the European Union, but of leaving the single market as well. In fact, on the morning of the general election, 70% of the British public, whichever way they voted in the referendum, simply wanted the government to get on and to complete and to conclude Brexit. Now, I know that Theresa's terrible campaign has cast a bit of doubt on this. And I saw that Emmanuel Macron yesterday, a call echoed by Mr Verhofstadt this morning, said there's still time for the United Kingdom to change its mind. You don't have to leave. Let me tell you, the only certainty in this mess is that we will be leaving. But that hasn't stopped a parade of former prime ministers and of former European commissioners lining up and attempting to get the British government to backslide on its commitments. There is now a big push, a big drive for us to opt for a Norway-style option. And I have to confess that your chief negotiator, Mr Barnier, is right, because it took Theresa May 9 months to trigger Article 50, and by the time the talks start, it will be nearly 4 months since it was triggered. So I do accept that we go into this as a British government with a British Prime Minister in a very weak position. And she's caught in a bit of a pincer movement, because the political class would like us to stay in the customs union, to stay in the single market. But the people have made it perfectly clear they want us to leave both of those things. And I would say this, that unless Theresa May, and it's difficult for her because she never really believed in Brexit, but unless Theresa May stands up at the summit next week and in those negotiations and makes it absolutely clear that she's not giving an inch, that we are leaving the single market, unless she does those things, her own party will get rid of her, and then yet more time will be lost in the Article 50 process.
Thank you. Mr. de Graaff.
Voorzitter, de Raad spreekt op 22 juni.
President. Defence and migration are both on the agenda for the Council. On defence, we don't want a European army. Cooperation between sovereign states occurs in NATO. That got us through the Cold War. We don't need a European army, costing us money. Brexit. The UK is leaving the EU because the EU is a failed project. It was trying to turn into a new Soviet Union. So we shouldn't be giving the UK a hefty bill. We should be having cooperation between sovereign states. Migration. NGOs have been dealing with tens of thousands of migrants, and Hungary and other Visegrad countries deserve our support in combating Islamification. Council should follow their example.
Grazie.
Thank you. Ms. Morvai.
Dear colleagues, dear citizens in Europe and overseas, I'm also asking for solidarity, but in this case, solidarity with my homeland, Hungary. As you all know, we resist migration, we resist mass migration, and we keep defending our borders and the borders of Europe. The European Union wants to push us on our knees. Now they started infringement proceedings against us. They want to punish us hard. They want to weaken our economy. And I ask for your solidarity and support around the world. Please write letters of dissent to this odd, strange man, Mr. Juncker, and moreover, make Hungary and Hungarian goods and services trendy. Lots of you are now deciding where to go for a holiday. Come to our safe country, which is still European. Come to Hungary. We have fantastic thermal spas. You can get your health back. We have a fantastic, beautiful capital, Budapest. Buy Hungarian products. If you go to see friends, bring a bottle of Hungarian wine or some good Hungarian food. Show that you support Hungary, and we won't give up. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Royal, 2 minutes.
President, colleagues. Well, we've just heard about how fantastic Brexit is. But we've got a government that is no longer capable of acting. People are looking into an uncertain future. And more people in Europe are turning towards Europe. That's the truth. That's the result. And I think we need to use that result as an opportunity for ourselves to do what the Council has been calling for as well. The Council hasn't always been as ready to act as we might have wanted, but this is a good opportunity. And colleagues, it's absolutely right. Rules that apply to all have to be applied by all. Otherwise we have a problem. That's what rules are for, to be observed. And that applies to all issues. Also in sovereign debt. If the Council wants to use the opportunity, then it's the proposals from the Commission on security and defence are extraordinarily good. We don't have to do all of it, but if we just take 2 or 3 things and implement it, get started, show people on Europe that they can go back on the streets and say Europe is great, Europe does something. I think that we can do something practical, more cooperation, not just in general terms, but practically. What are we doing about cybercrime? What are we doing about drones? What can we do to deliver a reality? Mr. Juncker said something very important. Mrs. Keller, when we're talking about refugees, that we have not got to the end of the day. But there's a lot of work ahead of us, but we have actually achieved something. Okay. Yes, the Turkish agreement was successful. We might not like all of it, but the results have not been bad. The numbers have fallen. And the relocation, much too few, but something has happened at least. It's easy to point the finger at what doesn't work, but this is a time when people in Europe are suddenly interested in Europe again and have hopes invested in Europe. Let's not disappoint them.
Version just suffered a big blow. The 27 are in fact more united in implementing the roadmap adopted in Rome. And once and for all, the European Union needs to assert itself as the political entity and a strong pillar of the multilateral system. So the defence package just presented by the Commission is certainly a very important move, and we need to be prepared to have an in-depth discussion about the package. But we know that lasting peace also depends a lot on permanent systemic action for development worldwide, starting with Africa. We know this very well. And we need also to be prepared to open a new generation of trade agreements, pushing for sustainable developments all over the world. At the same time, we need also to build much more powerful instruments to cope with citizens' concerns. There is a lot of homework to be done. We have just now the revision of the European Fund of Strategic Investment, and we need to make sure that this fund will become more powerful, pushing for real additional strategic investment projects. We need to make sure that the upcoming social pillar of social rights, will prepare the labour market in Europe to provide better jobs, particularly for young people. And we need to make sure that our Eurozone will start working for real convergence. So this is a very demanding internal agenda.
Stevens, un minuto.
Stevens, 1 minute.
Goedemorgen, voorzitter, collega's. De Europese...
Good morning, President, colleagues. The European Council will once again focus on the issue of illegal immigration. In other words, the economic migrants who cross the Mediterranean to come to our shores. So we've got 200 million that is assigned to address this, but I think we've got to have a proper returns policy which is essentially based on the Turkey agreement. We need a swift asylum procedure, one that is expeditions, particularly for those that are in Turkey. I think that's going to be a way of stemming migratory flows. What are we waiting for, colleagues, to work out cooperation agreements of a similar nature with all North African countries? Why do we only have an agreement between the EU and Turkey? Returning migrants to a safe country, according to the Commission, means to a place where their life is not under threat, where there is where the conditions are in place to ensure that they are going to be adequately fed. There are other countries in addition to Turkey that comply with this criteria. So I would call on European leaders to look at all the legal possibilities that would allow us to sign an EU-Libya agreement that would allow us to see an end to the terrible dramas we've seen in the Mediterranean.
Is this on the rules of procedure, Mr. Coburn?
Prego. Grazie. I've just noticed something. I wondered if everybody else had noticed the same thing, that all the leaders today are speaking in English. They don't normally speak in English. This is extremely strange. And I thought President Juncker, my good friend Jean-Claude Juncker here, had said that English was no longer the language of the European Parliament. Is there something I've missed here, ladies and gentlemen? Something I've missed? Grazie, ma non è ai sensi...
Well, sorry, that's not really a point of order. Mr. Juaristi, you've got the floor for 1 minute.
Presidente, pensaba hablar...
Thank you, President. I was going to talk about externalization of migration controls and asylum. We have very little democratic oversight of that process. This will have significant consequences. That's what I was going to say. But listening to Mr. Juncker, although I don't expect any great change in policy, I do think we should change our terminology. What do you think the message to society is if we keep talking about defending, protecting our borders against a danger, an enemy? That's what it sounds like. Fellow members, the enemy in this case, the danger in this case, is normal human beings looking for a better life for themselves and for their children. Terminology is not innocent. It can send out a xenophobic far-right message by implication. Look at the people who are dying in the Mediterranean region. Look at the NGOs next to the Libyan coastline. They're sending out flares. Nobody goes to help them. No European boats go to help them.
Ferrara.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Ferrara, 1 minute. Thank you very much, President. Italy is paying the price for the failures of Europe to manage migratory flows. Hundreds of thousands arrived in 2016, and there's been even more since the beginning of 2017. Italy is facing huge expenditure, 1 billion more than in 2016. The aid coming from Europe is tiny. 68 million, that's what we've heard. That's about 3% of the total required. So I think sharing of responsibility sounds pretty hollow. Italy is a net contributor to the EU, so it's actually giving a lot more than it receives. The Dublin regulation is pretty much been declared dead, but it means that more refugees are being relocated back to Italy than are being sent to the rest of Europe. Europe seems absolutely incapable of finding effective, fair solutions. If the Council continues to simply pursue national egoism, then there's not going to be any reform of the common European asylum system, and it's going to be a failure for the complete European Union. Mr. Ferrand, 1 minute.
Colleagues, the next European Council will be homage on the way to more migratory flows. The newly elected French president wants to impose some particularly pernicious ideas, the common European right of asylum. Apparently this is going to replace national legislation. The right to asylum will become a prerogative of the EU. Well, it's not. It's a national competence. We completely reject this kind of drift, which will only lead to further migratory pressure on our countries, and furthermore it will limit any capacity for us to take our own decisions.
Mr. Woolfe, 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today in this chamber, the political elites are gloating and cheering. They've overseen the resistance parties failing to take power in Austria and France, UKIP decimated, and a conservative Brexit government weakened. Political elitism is a doctrine of servitude, but its forces are strong, determined, well-financed, and it is attacking and destroying its enemies one by one. They infiltrated UKIP. They isolated, ignored and removed true Conservative Party Brexiteers. They attacked and removed the voices of resistance from our radio and TV stations. They attack and abuse the president who was elected in the United States of America, yet celebrate the globalist placeman they installed in France. Those who love freedom, patriots, Democrats, Brexiteers, must say no more. We must regroup and return fire. We must fight for a true Brexit, not a fake Brexit. Thank you.
Grazie, onorevole Lewandowski.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewandowski. 1 minute 30.
Dziękuję. Na agendzie.
Thank you very much. On the European Council agenda, we will see very important issues which will decide about the future: security, migration, fighting terrorism, Brexit. These are all hot issues which are great challenges. This is the source of fears, and these fears are feeding populism. So this will be a very important test of the powers of the European Union. When it comes to migration, the major challenge is the middle Mediterranean route because of the very chaotic situation in Libya. We have the whole business of smuggling people. We should introduce the commitments. There is no time for declarations. Manfred WEBER has mentioned that we should implement the Maltese Declaration and reform our asylum scheme. We also have a very unpredictable partner in the United States. Therefore, we should have some kind of insurance policy in Europe. However, it will be difficult to find some common terms with Trump on international trade or climate. However, this defense dimension should be developed in sync with NATO, because I do not exclude that Trump will confirm the US commitments in Poland, because he is arriving in Poland on the 6th of July. So the inspiration for us should be the joint declaration that was signed last year in Warsaw.
Thank you, Mrs. Fajon. 1 minute.
Thank you very much. Every summit deals with migrations, but people still cannot count on us. Member states are not fulfilling their commitments on the relocation of asylum seekers from Greece and Italy. President Juncker, you mentioned hundreds of millions of potential climate refugees as a result of the non-implementation of the climate agreement. Unfortunately, this House also has no support for clear criteria which would provide for international protection to climate refugees. In our letter, we pointed out the drama of unaccompanied children to European leaders. I'm coming back from Greece, and without an ambitious Dublin reform, the situation in Greece and Italy will get out of control. Discussions in the Council are radically opposed to what is being discussed ambitiously in Parliament. We are building security on European borders, but we are not building security in places where people are fleeing from. Through internal border controls between Slovenia and Austria, for instance, where there have been no illegal crossings for months, we will not be able to resolve the situation. And much more attention should be paid to the fight against criminal groups that traffic people. We should also focus on violence against women and children. We need to do much more. We need to solve the situation. Our citizens.
Mr. Proust, one.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think the message we need to send to the heads of state and government before the Council has to be follows. It's time for clarity. Major political events such as Brexit, the withdrawal of the United States from the Paris Agreement with Donald Trump's irresponsible decision means that we've got an excellent opportunity to be clear about what we are, what we stand for. Europe is changing. It is built every day through our work on the basis of our priorities. The revision of the posting of working workers was something that MEPs took in hand before the French leader did, strengthening the monetary union, a Europe of defense, trade policy to ensure that we have something that works for our jobs and our interests. European leaders must be firm, they must be courageous, and above all they must be bold enough to show unity. They must be firm towards Turkey. They must understand that they can't expect to join the EU under current circumstances. Unity to show to Mr. Trump's United States or Mr. Putin's Russia that Europe is back. We're going to create a bloc that protects its citizens and is strong on the international stage. Unity at last, so that member states stand together in the Brexit negotiations with the Commission and Mr. Barnier. We must make it clear to Mrs. May, weakened at the recent elections, that leaving our community of destiny is not just a game. Thank you.
Mr. Weidenholzer. Joseph, you've got 1 minute. Well, thank you very much. If you compare the situation in the EU with the situation a year ago, I think without a doubt we can say that there are signs of stabilization. Not only the economic situation is improving, but we've started to get a bit of an idea of where Brexit and Trump are heading. But with refugee policy, the situation is still very complicated. The numbers have gone down, but we still haven't managed to set the path for the long-term system. We haven't managed to reform Dublin, and we haven't managed to create legal corridors for migration. But the situation remains that there are people stuck in Greece and the Western Balkans, and that's going to become a security problem for the whole region. We're still not able to get enough resources in a timely manner to the regions of origin. Mosul and Raqqa are said to become the new tragedies.
González Pons, 1 minute 30.
Mr. González Pons, 1 minute 30.
Thank you, President. I would like to start with a moment of remembrance of the victims of the London attacks, particularly the Spanish citizen who was killed when he was fighting back against the attackers. And we need to stand up for the values that unite us. The victims of the latest attacks in London were not only from the UK, they were from Australia, Canada, France and Spain. We are not alone facing terrorism. No country in the EU will be able to meet the challenges of globalization alone. Nobody is smarter than everyone else. Nobody is capable of finding solutions alone. We all need to work together to fight against those who wish us harm, and we need to come together for the future. Brexit is a step backwards. Brexit means turning one's back on things. Erasmus we were celebrating yesterday. The opposite of Brexit, 4 million people moving around, Brits going to other countries, foreigners going to Britain, like my daughter Maria. The million of children, the Erasmus children growing up speaking 4 languages, the first generation of born Europeans, if you like. Europe is being built, is being made out of our difference, out of our tolerance. That's what makes us strong. So, if you have the choice between Erasmus and Brexit, choose Erasmus, choose generosity, don't choose selfishness.
Mr. Jauregui Atondo, 1 minute.
Thanks, President. Here it's worth highlighting that there are grounds to be more positive and optimistic than previously in previous years. Economic growth, we're seeing jobs created, and we're defeating populists. I think it's worth emphasizing that. I would remind you that just yesterday Mr. Macron, the French president, announced that he was in favor of rolling out the financial transactions tax in the European Union. This is an idea we should consider. We need our own financial resources in the European Union to address the very many problems we face. We need funds to address migration. We need to fund security and defense, given the threat of terrorism, because for the first time in the history of the European Union, internal security depends on our external security, and we've got important needs such as the social pillar and the need to address climate change, as Mr. Macron suggested. Let's head down that avenue.
Thank you, Mrs. Gardini. 1 minute 30. Thank you, President. Colleagues, I wanted to say that last Sunday, Italians went to the polls to elect mayors. The mayor of Lampedusa, which has become the symbol of receiving refugees, been to the White House to see Obama, and has been celebrated by Renzi and others, she lost her place. Does that mean that Italians don't show solidarity? Does it mean that Italians are not generous and welcoming? No, we need to continue to show that spirit. But I wanted to mention one opinion that I heard, that finally we're overcoming the inexorable logic of numbers, that we're coming to the point where we need solidarity. When a room is full, nobody else can come in. That's the point that we've got to in Italy. Many Italian local authorities are refusing to accept any new arrivals. It doesn't matter what political party their mayors are from. Now, people say this is an epical moment, but it is the result of a strategy that has been designed by criminal organizations. So we do need a united, serious policy for Europe, but it needs to be quite a harsh one. We don't want to show solidarity with criminal organizations that are trafficking in human beings. Basta.
Onorevole Kyenge, lei la parola, un minuto.
Mr. Kyenge, you have the floor. 1 minute.
Thank you, President. I would like to express my solidarity with Giusy Nicolini, Mayor. There are so many items on the agenda of the European Council that I will only be able to make a few remarks on migration. The Maltese presidency has recalled that there is a drama on the central Mediterranean route every day. President Juncker has referred to the results which have been achieved by migration policy. This has been possible thanks to the role of Parliament as co-legislator, calling on Member States to shoulder their responsibilities, and also bringing infringement proceedings, which has been launched against 3 Member States. There are punitive measures, but we also need long-term political initiatives such as a partnership with Africa. The Maltese presidency should recall before the European Council that there is a procedure to be applied for reforming the European Common Asylum System. We need to go through ordinary legislative procedure in order to do this. I hope that there will be a discussion of legislative proposals in the future. I know that the Commission is working with a great sense of responsibility. We don't need imagination or alternative solutions. We need to move forward with those.
Thank you, Mr. Kiange. We now move on to Catch the Eye. Well, I'm sorry to say that with all of those who've asked for the floor, I'm not going to be able to hear from all of them. We'll have only one speaker per group, because we've got another debate after this one. And then we have a formal sitting. Mrs. McGuinness.
Thank you, President. Next week's Council, there will be a new Irish face around the table, and a new face of Ireland, perhaps. And today, the Taoiseach Enda Kenny hands over that office to Leo Varadkar. And I take this opportunity to wish our new Taoiseach, our new party leader, well in his work ahead, and also to acknowledge the great work of Enda Kenny as leader of our country in very difficult times. And yesterday there were tributes paid to him, and the most remarkable comments were the simplest and nicest ones about his sunny disposition, his optimism in dark times, and how that is so needed in politics today. And that, if you like, disposition was undented by 6 years in office, as I say, in very difficult times. He spoke about the honour that he had of leading our country, and I hope that our new leader will carry that same optimistic disposition and work for a united Europe. His last call was to Theresa May to warn her about a Brexit that would damage the Good Friday Agreement. We should honour his words, his commitment to peace, his commitment to Europe. I salute his work and I wish our new leader every success.
Aguiar, un minuto anche per lei.
Mr. Aguiar, 1 minute for you.
Señor Presidente, telegráfica.
Thank you, Mr. President. Very briefly indeed. Security and the fight against terrorism. I pay tribute to Ignacio Echevarria, a Spanish hero who fell at the hands of vicious terrorism, defending European citizens, defending European values. Defense. It's not just a question of spending more money, no. It's a question of coordination and solidarity between member states. Pooling our defense resources would mean a massive difference in our ability to work together on defense. Migratory routes, we've been told that they're under control, but what about the countries that are in breach? There have got to be sanctions against them. And then finally, climate change. The European Union must speak with one voice against the absolutely insane and populist decision taken by President Trump to withdraw the United States from COP21. He just doesn't care about the 61,000 people who suffer through climate change every day, and we expect 500 million climate refugees fleeing from desertification, rising sea levels and droughts. Thank you.
Jurek, prego.
Mr. Jurek, 1 minute.
Thank you very much, President. Today, again, Mr. Juncker has pushed responsibility for his tragic policy onto such countries as Hungary, the Czech Republic and Poland. But solidarity, as he was so kind to say, it does not consist in liability for somebody else's mistakes. Solidarity is about helping somebody else in a need. If your policy is wrong and faulty, then draw your own conclusions. Mr. Juncker mentioned law. Well, a law is responsibility for your actions, so European authorities should resign their posts because previous decisions as regards illegal trafficking of humans have not been fully implemented. We all know that our seamen and our Coast Guard are saving people day in, day out, but you looked on passively to what happened in the Mediterranean, and now you dare to lecture those who disagreed then. Thank you.
Prego.
Mrs. James, 1 minute.
Thank you, sir. Well, since the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union, the response from the EU has been more Europe. It has announced its intention to speed up the Capital Markets Union. It has increased the size of the Juncker Fund by a staggering €185 billion and announced the formation of the Common Defence Fund. Also, suggestions that EU funding in the future will be contingent upon national acceptance of the European Public Prosecutor's Office, and that non-Eurozone members will have to adopt the single currency. This is a staggering authoritarian and control freakery in terms of a political system. And it's all very well suggesting that the so-called populist parties across Europe are now in demise. I would suggest and ask the EU to very, very seriously consider whether some of the announcements that they have made and the demands that are being now placed on member states will actually be counterproductive to what they want to do in terms of stopping populism. Thank you.
E ora le repliche, Presidente.
And now for replies, Mr. Juncker.
Non intende intervenire?
Oh, you don't plan to speak? Okay. All right. Well, in that case, we'll hear from the Council, Mrs. Dalli.
Thank you. And thank you so much for this useful exchange, which I will convey to the President of the European Council. Let me use these concluding remarks to make a more general comment. Recently, a tangible sense of unity, urgency and responsibility has been added to our actions. This should also encourage us, the Parliament and Council, to deliver results more rapidly, united by the same objective, and showing that we are able to meet the challenges that the EU is facing. The Presidency needs your ideas and your energy. It needs your flexibility and your sense of responsibility to deliver on the guidance provided by the European Council. We have had many achievements in the past 5 months, but there is much more work to be done ahead of us. So let us keep this sense of urgency alive. Thank you.
Grazie, Ministro Dalli.
Thank you, Mrs. Dalli. I'll now suspend the sitting for a couple of minutes. Session suspended.